I still remember the exact moment my world cracked. It was an ordinary evening, the kind that slips quietly into night without asking for attention. The house felt too large again, filled with the kind of silence that presses against your chest and reminds you of everything you have lost ever since my wife passed away. The walls had stopped echoing laughter, and the rooms no longer carried warmth. Only memories remained, and even those felt distant, as if they belonged to another life. I had learned to live with that silence because I had no choice, but there was one voice that still brought me peace. My daughter Aisha. She had always been my pride, my reason to wake up every morning, my last connection to a life that once felt whole. I raised her with my own hands. After her mother left this world, I became both father and mother for her. I learned how to braid her hair, how to cook her favorite meals, how to stay awake all night when she was sick. I gave her everything, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because she was my child, my heart, my entire world. And that night I called her just to hear her voice, nothing more, nothing less. I did not expect anything special. I just wanted to feel close to her again, even if it was through a simple conversation over the phone. When she answered, she sounded warm, almost perfectly warm, as if she knew exactly how a daughter should sound when speaking to her father. "Hello, Abba," she said, and for a moment I smiled without realizing it. We talked about small things, her day, her husband, their plans for the future. She told me they were thinking about traveling, maybe starting something new. I listened quietly, enjoying every word, because it made me feel like I was still part of her life. Even if only from a distance, there was a comfort in hearing her speak, a reassurance that she was happy, and that was always enough for me. I never asked for anything in return. I never expected her to take care of me or to give me anything. All I ever wanted was to see her smile, even if I could not see it with my own eyes anymore. Before ending the call, I paused for a second. Something inside me told me to say it, something I had been meaning to tell her for days. I took a slow breath and said, "I signed the papers today, the house, the savings, everything is now in your name." There was a silence on the other end, not long but noticeable, long enough for something inside me to shift slightly, but I ignored it. "Oh, Abba, you did not have to," she replied, but her voice felt different, not emotional, not overwhelmed, just controlled, like someone choosing their words carefully. I chuckled softly, trying to lighten the moment. "You are my daughter. Who else would I give it to?" I meant every word. I had spent years building what little I had, not for myself, but for her future, for her comfort, for her security. I wanted her to never struggle the way I did. I wanted her to have everything I never had growing up. And in that moment I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I had fulfilled my responsibility as a father. We exchanged a few more words, simple goodbyes, nothing unusual, nothing that would have warned me of what was about to happen. I moved my thumb to end the call, but for some reason I stopped. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was habit, maybe it was something deeper, something I could not explain. But I did not hang up. I kept the phone to my ear, and then I heard it, a faint sound, at first barely noticeable, a small laugh, not the kind that brings joy, but the kind that hides something beneath it. My body froze. I did not move. I did not breathe. I just listened. Then her husband spoke, his voice clear and careless. "I told you he would do it. Old people are so easy when they are emotional." Each word felt like a knife cutting through years of trust, years of love, years of sacrifice. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. I wanted to tell myself it was not what it sounded like, but before I could even gather my thoughts, I heard her laugh again. "My daughter, the girl I raised, the girl I protected, the girl I loved more than my own life." And then she said the words that shattered everything. The old man signed everything. We just had to be patient. Time stopped. I could not feel my hands. I could not feel my heart beating. It was as if my entire existence had paused in that moment. Those words echoed in my mind again and again. The old man, not Abba, not father, not the man who gave her everything, just the old man. Something disposable, something easy, something to be used and discarded when no longer needed. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. My hands were trembling, but I did not drop the phone. I just sat there staring at nothing, my mind trying to process what I had just heard, but failing again and again. Memories began to flood my thoughts, uninvited, unstoppable. I saw her as a child, running towards me with open arms, calling me Abba with pure love in her voice. I saw her crying the day her mother passed, clinging to me as if I was the only thing keeping her world from falling apart. I saw myself promising her that I would always be there, that I would never let anything hurt her, and now here I was realizing that the only person who truly had the power to hurt me was her. I had given her everything, not just money, not just a house, but my time, my energy, my youth, my entire life, and in return I had become a joke, a plan, a strategy, something to be managed until I was no longer useful. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream, I wanted to call her back and ask why, but I did none of those things. Instead, I sat there in silence, the same silence that had filled my house for years, but this time it felt different, heavier, colder, more suffocating than ever before. That night I Did not eat, I did not sleep, I just lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying those words again and again, trying to find a different meaning, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood, but deep down I knew the truth was clear and undeniable. There was no misunderstanding, there was no mistake, this was real, this was my reality. The daughter I loved had seen me as nothing more than an opportunity, and as the hours passed, something inside me began to change. It was not sudden, it was not loud, it was quiet, almost invisible, but it was there. The pain did not disappear, it settled deep within me, becoming something else, something stronger, something colder. I realized that love without respect is nothing, and trust once broken cannot be repaired, no matter how much you wish it could. I had spent my entire life giving without expecting anything in return, but now I understood that even the purest love can be taken for granted if it is not valued. I closed my eyes for a moment, and for the first time in my life I allowed myself to accept a painful truth. My daughter was no longer the little girl I once knew. She had become someone else, someone I did not recognize, someone capable of looking at me and seeing not a father but a weakness to be used. And in that moment, as the night stretched on endlessly, I made a decision. I would not confront her. I would not beg for explanations. I would not show her my pain, because some wounds are too deep to be healed with words, and some betrayals change you in ways that cannot be undone. I would remain silent, but my silence would not be weakness. It would be something else, something she would never expect, because sometimes the greatest response to betrayal is not anger, not revenge, not even confrontation. Sometimes it is patience. And as I lay there in the darkness, one thought repeated itself in my mind over and over again. The old man signed everything. Yes, he did, but the old man was not as helpless as they believed. And before the night ended, before sleep finally took over my exhausted mind, I whispered softly into the empty room, not in anger, not in sadness, but in quiet realization. This is not the end, this is only the beginning. The next morning arrived quietly, as if nothing had happened, as if the night before had not shattered something deep inside me. I woke up at the same time I always did, out of habit rather than rest. My body felt heavy, but my face remained calm. I walked slowly to the kitchen and prepared tea the same way I had done for years, boiling water, adding leaves, waiting for that familiar color to rise, pouring it into the same old cup that had become part of my routine. Everything looked normal, everything felt normal, but I knew something had changed forever. I carried the cup to my chair near the window and sat down, looking outside at the empty street where life continued without caring about what had broken inside me. The world does not stop for anyone, it keeps moving forward even when your heart feels stuck. In one moment I took a sip of tea and closed my eyes for a second, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue, almost welcoming it because it matched the taste of my thoughts perfectly. Memories of Aisha began to return again, but this time they felt different. They no longer brought warmth, they came with questions, with doubt, with a quiet pain that refused to leave. I remembered the day she was born, the way I held her so carefully, afraid that even my touch might hurt her. I remembered the nights I stayed awake when she had fever, praying silently that it would pass. I remembered the first time she called me Abba, her tiny voice filled with innocence and trust. One had built my entire life around her. Every decision, every sacrifice, every effort was made with her future in mind. I had never once imagined that one day she would sit somewhere and laugh about me as if I were nothing more than a stepping stone. Those words from the night before echoed again. The old man signed everything. Each repetition felt like a hammer striking the same wound, but instead of breaking me further, it started shaping something inside me, something stronger, something I had not felt in years. Clarity. Pain has a strange way of opening your eyes. It forces you to see truths you once ignored. It strips away illusions and leaves you with nothing but reality. And in that reality I saw my mistake clearly. I had loved blindly, I had trusted completely, and in doing so I had made myself vulnerable, not because love is wrong, but because I had given without boundaries, without protection, without considering that even those closest to you can change. I finished my tea and placed the cup down carefully. My hands were steady now. The trembling from the night before had disappeared, replaced by something far more controlled. I stood up and walked back to my room, taking slow, measured steps, as if each movement was part of a plan that had already begun forming in my mind. I opened the drawer where I kept my documents and looked at the files neatly arranged. Everything I had worked for over the years was there. Property papers, bank records, legal agreements, each piece representing years of effort and sacrifice, and among them were the documents I had signed transferring everything to Aisha. I picked them up and stared at the signatures, at my own name written with trust and love. A small bitter smile crossed my face. How easy it had been, how willingly I had handed over my entire life without a second thought. But what Aisha did not know, what her husband did not know, was that the process was not as simple as they believed. There were legal conditions, clauses that required final confirmation, steps that had not yet been completed. I had not lied to her when I said I signed everything, but I had not told her everything either. And now That small detail became my advantage. I closed the file and placed it back carefully, my mind now clear and focused. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew how I had to do it. This was not something that could be rushed. This was not something that could be handled with anger or impulse. This required patience, precision, and above all, silence. I picked up my phone and looked at her contact for a moment. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I stopped myself. There was no point in confronting her now, not yet. Confrontation would only give her a chance to lie, to manipulate, to twist the truth, and I had no interest in hearing excuses. I had already heard enough. The truth had revealed itself clearly, and I would act accordingly. I put the phone down and got ready to leave the house. For the first time in days, I stepped outside, feeling the morning air against my face. It felt strangely refreshing, as if I had stepped into a different phase of my life, one where I was no longer guided by emotion but by understanding. I made my way to my lawyer's office, a place I had visited many times before, but never with this kind of purpose. When I entered, he greeted me with a polite smile, unaware of the storm that had passed through my life the night before. We exchanged brief pleasantries before I sat down across from him, placing my hands firmly on the table. I want everything reversed, I said, my voice calm but firm. He looked at me surprised, clearly not expecting those words. After all, I had been the one who insisted on transferring everything to my daughter just days ago. Sir, is everything all right? He asked cautiously. I nodded. Slowly. Everything is clear now, I replied, and that clarity left no room for hesitation. He adjusted his glasses and opened the file, reviewing the documents carefully. Technically, it is possible, he said after a moment. There are still pending processes. We can halt the transfer and revert ownership, but it will require immediate action and strict confidentiality. I leaned forward slightly. Do it, I said, without a trace of doubt in my voice. Whatever needs to be done, do it. He studied my face for a second, perhaps trying to understand what had caused such a sudden change, but he did not ask questions, and I was grateful for that. Some things are better left unsaid. We began the process immediately, signing new documents, filing necessary requests, initiating reversals. Every step felt like reclaiming a part of myself that I had given away too easily. It was not just about money or property. It was about dignity, about respect, about correcting a mistake that could have cost me everything. Over the next few days, I continued my routine as if nothing had changed. I stayed home. I made tea. I watched the same quiet streets outside my window, but behind that calm exterior, I was working steadily, ensuring that every asset, every account, every legal right was secured once again in my name. The process was not instant, but it was effective, and with each passing day I felt a growing sense of control returning to my life. Meanwhile, Aisha continued her visit. She came by with the same gentle smile, the same carefully chosen words. Abba, you should rest more, she would say, placing her hand lightly on my shoulder. Abba, you have done enough in life now. It is time for you to relax. I would nod and smile, playing my part perfectly, as if I were still the same unaware father she believed me to be. Her husband often joined her, his tone respectful but distant, always watching, always calculating. Abba, handling finances must be stressful for you, he said one afternoon. Maybe it is better if we take care of everything for you now. I looked at him calmly and smiled. You are right, I said softly. It is tiring. His eyes flickered with satisfaction, thinking his plan was unfolding exactly as intended, and I let him believe it, because the truth is sometimes the best way to win is to let others think they already have. Days turned into weeks, and slowly everything was set in place. The transfers were reversed, the ownership restored, the access secured. There was nothing left for them to claim, nothing left for them to take in. Yet I said nothing, I showed nothing. I continued to play the role of the old man. They thought I was weak, trusting, unaware, but inside I had become something else, something they could not see, something they would not expect. I had learned that silence can be powerful, that patience can be a weapon, that sometimes the strongest move is to wait for the right moment rather than act in haste. And as I sat once again in my chair by the window one evening, watching the sun set over the quiet street, I felt a strange sense of peace, not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had taken control of it. I had turned it into something useful, something that guided my actions instead of breaking me, and in that moment I understood something deeply important. Revenge is not about anger. It is not about shouting or fighting or proving a point. Revenge at its core is about balance, about restoring what was lost, about ensuring that those who tried to take advantage of you face the consequences of their actions, not through chaos, but through truth. And as the sky darkened and the lights of the street slowly turned on, I whispered quietly to myself, almost as if confirming the path I had chosen. They think I know nothing, but soon they will understand everything, because revenge is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not rush. It waits patiently in silence until the moment is right, and when that moment comes, it does not need to shout to be heard. It simply unfolds exactly as it was meant to, and In that quiet realization, I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and allowed myself a small moment of calm, knowing that the storm had not passed. It had only just begun to take shape in a way they would never see coming. The day finally arrived, not with thunder or warning, but with a quiet certainty that settled deep in my chest. Long before the doorbell rang, I woke up earlier than usual that morning, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to rest. There was a strange calmness inside me, the kind that comes when you already know what is about to happen and have prepared yourself for it completely. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sunlight slowly creep across the empty street, and for a moment I allowed myself to remember the past again, not with pain this time, but with clarity. I saw Aisha as a little girl running barefoot across this same floor, laughing without fear, trusting without doubt, believing that her father would always be there for her, and I had been there every single time without fail. I had carried her through sickness, through heartbreak, through loss. I had stood between her and every hardship life tried to throw at her, and now I was about to stand before her in a way she had never seen before, not as the man she could easily manipulate, not as the old man she laughed about, but as someone who had finally understood his own worth. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second bringing the moment closer, and when the bell finally rang, it did not startle me. I placed my cup down carefully and walked to the door with slow, steady steps. When I opened it, Aisha stood there with her husband, both dressed neatly, their expressions carrying a mix of excitement and expectation. She smiled, the same practiced smile that once would have melted my heart. "Abba," she said softly as she stepped inside, followed by her husband, who greeted me politely with a nod. I returned their greetings calmly and led them to the living room, the same room that once held birthday celebrations, laughter, family gatherings, and memories that now felt distant and fragile. We sat down across from each other, the air between us heavy with unspoken intentions. I could see it in their eyes. They were eager, confident, certain that everything was already in their control. Aisha adjusted her dupatta slightly and looked at me with a seriousness that felt rehearsed. "Abba, we need to talk," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I nodded. "Of course, Beta, what is it?" Her husband leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as if preparing to discuss something important. "We think it is time to finalize everything," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You know, complete the transfer, move the assets, maybe even consider selling this house, since it might be too much for you to manage now." The word sell echoed in my mind louder than anything else, not because of the house itself, but because of what it represented. This was not just a building, this was a life. This was the place where her mother had smiled, where her laughter once filled every corner, where our family existed before it was reduced to memories. And hearing them speak about it so casually, so practically, as if it were just another asset, made something inside me tighten, but my face remained calm. I nodded slowly, as if considering their suggestion. "That sounds reasonable," I said quietly, and I watched their expressions change instantly. Their eyes lit up with relief, with satisfaction, with the belief that their plan was unfolding exactly as they had hoped. But before they could continue, I raised my hand slightly. "There is something I want to show you first," I said, my voice steady. I reached for the file I had placed on the table earlier and slid it towards them. They exchanged a quick glance before opening it, their movements quick, eager, almost impatient as they flipped through the pages. At first their expressions remained unchanged, but within seconds that confidence began to fade. Confusion replaced it, followed by disbelief, and then something deeper, something closer to panic. "What is this?" Aisha asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked up at me. I leaned back in my chair calmly. "Read it carefully," I replied. Her hands shook as she turned each page. Her husband leaned closer, scanning the documents, his brows furrowing with every line he read. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second, until finally he slammed the file shut. "This is not possible," he snapped. "You already signed everything." His voice carried a sharp edge, now the calm politeness gone, replaced by frustration and anger. I looked at him steadily. "Yes," I said softly, "I did." And then I corrected my mistake. The words hung in the air between us, simple yet powerful enough to shift everything. Aisha stared at me, her eyes wide, her lips parted as if searching for words that refused to come. This cannot be right," she whispered, flipping through the pages again as if hoping they would somehow change. "Every asset, every property, every account had been legally transferred back into my name, secured, finalized, untouchable. There was nothing left for them, nothing they could claim, nothing they could control." "Abba," she said finally, her voice breaking, "what is going on?" I met her gaze directly, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that I had not seen in a long time. Not confidence, not calculation, but fear. I heard everything I said quietly, the words deliberate. "The call," I added, "when you thought I had hung up." The color drained from her face instantly. Her husband looked at her sharply, then back at me, realization hitting him like a blow. The laughter, the words, the truth they had spoken so freely, believing they were alone, had now returned to face them, and there was no escape from it. "Abba, please," Aisha said, her voice shaking as tears began to form in her eyes. "We did not mean it. We were just joking." Joking, I repeated softly the word almost foreign on my tongue because there was nothing humorous about betrayal, nothing light about the way they had spoken about me. I gave you my life, I continued, my voice calm but heavy, with meaning, every sacrifice, every effort, every moment. I spent building a future for you, and you laughed at me. Her tears fell freely now, her composure completely shattered. Abba, I am sorry, she said, reaching out as if to bridge the distance between us, but I did not move. Her husband tried to speak, but I raised my hand, stopping him immediately. This is between me and my daughter, I said firmly, my gaze never leaving hers. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was not empty, it was full of truth, full of consequences, full of everything that had been hidden until now. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around us. I forgive you, I said quietly, and for a brief second hope flickered in her eyes, relief almost visible, as if she believed those words would undo everything, as if forgiveness meant restoration, as if it meant things could go back to the way they were. But then I continued, my voice steady, unwavering, but I will never trust you again. The hope in her eyes disappeared instantly, replaced by something deeper, something heavier, understanding perhaps, or the realization that some things once broken can never be repaired, no matter how much you regret them. Her husband stood up abruptly, his frustration barely contained. This is unfair, he said, his voice raised. After everything we have done for you. I almost smiled at that statement, not out of amusement but out of disbelief. Everything you have done for me, I repeated slowly, the irony of those words too clear to ignore. I stood up as well, now facing them directly, the distance between us no longer just physical but something far greater. I gave you everything, I said, my voice firm but controlled, and you saw it as an opportunity, not a responsibility, not a gift, but something to take advantage of. Neither of them responded. There was nothing they could say, nothing that would change the truth that now stood clearly between us. I walked to the door and opened it, the gesture simple yet final. You should leave, I said quietly. Aisha hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, as if searching for the right words that could somehow fix what had been broken, but no words came. She wiped her tears slowly and walked towards the door. Her husband followed, his expression tense, his pride wounded, his plans destroyed. As they stepped outside, she turned back one last time. Abba, please, she whispered, but I did not respond. I simply closed the door gently, not with anger, not with force, but with a quiet finality that carried more weight than any shout ever could. And as I stood there in the silence of my home, once again I realized something important. This was not a moment of victory. It was not a moment of revenge in the way most people understand it. There was no joy in their pain, no satisfaction in their loss, only a quiet sense of balance restored, a truth acknowledged, a boundary finally drawn. I walked back to the living room and sat down in my chair, the same chair where I had spent countless evenings thinking, remembering, waiting. But this time I felt different, lighter in a way, not because the pain was gone, but because I had faced it. I had not allowed it to control me. I had not allowed it to define me. I had taken it and turned it into something else, something stronger, something that allowed me to stand firm without losing myself. And as I looked around the room at the walls that still held echoes of the past, I understood that this was not the end of my story. It was simply the end of a chapter, one that had taught me more about love, trust, and strength than I had ever expected to learn. And as the evening light slowly faded into darkness, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let out a long, quiet breath, knowing that whatever came next I would face it not as the man they thought I was, but as the man I had finally become. After they left, the house did not feel empty the way it used to. Instead, it felt still, calm, almost as if something heavy had finally been lifted from the walls themselves. I stood by the door for a long moment after closing it, my hand resting lightly against the wood as I listened to the fading sound of their footsteps disappearing into the distance. There was no urge to call them back, no hesitation, no second thoughts, only a quiet acceptance of what had just happened and what it meant for the rest of my life. I turned slowly and walked back into the living room, each step steady, each breath controlled. The same room that had once been filled with memories of laughter and family now held a different kind of meaning. It was no longer a place tied only to the past. It had become a place where I had reclaimed something I did not even realize I had lost myself. I sat down in my chair and looked around, not with sadness, but with a strange sense of clarity. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet everything felt different. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt peaceful, as if it were no longer a reminder of loneliness, but a space where I could finally think without distraction, without illusion, without pain clouding my judgment. For years I had lived my life for others first, for my wife, then for my daughter. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I chose was centered around their happiness, and I never questioned it, because love makes you believe that giving everything is the right thing to do. But what I had learned through this experience was something far more important. Love without self-respect becomes weakness, and trust without boundaries becomes vulnerability. I had not been wrong to love my daughter. I had not been wrong to want to give her everything, but I had been wrong to forget myself in the process. I had been wrong to Believed that love alone was enough to protect me from betrayal, and now as I sat there in the quiet of my home I understood that the most important thing I could do was not to punish them, not to seek revenge in the way people often imagine, but to rebuild myself in a way that no one could ever take advantage of again. The next few days passed in a calm, steady rhythm. I did not reach out to Aisha, and she did not come back. The distance between us had become real, no longer hidden beneath polite conversations or forced smiles, and while there was a part of me that felt the absence of her presence, I did not allow that feeling to control me. Instead, I focused on what I needed to do for myself. I began organizing my life in a way I had never done before. I reviewed my finances, not with the intention of giving them away, but with the intention of managing them wisely for my own future. I went through old belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go, not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to create a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been in the past. And then one morning, as I sat by the window watching the sunlight fill the room, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would sell the house, not because anyone had suggested it, not because it was too much to handle, but because I was ready to move forward. This house had been a part of my life for many years. It held memories, both beautiful and painful, but I realized that holding on to it was also holding on to a version of myself that I needed to leave behind. The process of selling the house was not difficult, but it was emotional. Each room I walked through brought back a different memory, a different moment, a different piece of the life I had once lived. I did not rush through it. I allowed myself to feel everything fully, the joy, the sorrow, the nostalgia, the loss, because I knew that only by facing those emotions could I truly move on. When the deal was finally completed and the keys were handed over, I stood outside one last time, looking at the house, not with regret, but with gratitude. It had given me shelter. It had held my family together. It had been the foundation of my life, and now it was time to let it go. I moved into a smaller place, a simple home in a quiet area where the noise of the world felt distant and the air felt lighter. It was not as grand as the house I had left behind, but it did not need to be. It was enough. It was peaceful. It was mine, and in that space I began to rediscover myself in ways I had never imagined. I started waking up earlier, not out of habit, but out of desire. I would sit by the window with my tea, watching the sunrise, feeling a sense of calm that I had not felt in years. I began taking walks in the nearby park where I would see other people living their lives, children playing, elders sitting together sharing stories, strangers passing by without knowing anything about me, and for the first time in a long time I felt connected to the world again, not through obligation, but through choice. And then one day, as I sat on a bench watching a group of children laughing together, I felt something shift inside me again, not pain, not anger, but something softer, something warmer. I realized that while I had lost something important, I still had the ability to give, not in the way I had before, not blindly, not without thought, but in a way that was meaningful, that was intentional, that was balanced. I began visiting orphanages, spending time with children who had no one to call their own. I listened to their stories. I shared my own experiences. I offered what guidance I could, and in return I received something far more valuable than anything I had ever given before: genuine connection, genuine gratitude. I also started helping elderly people who had been abandoned by their families, people who understood the pain of betrayal, people who knew what it felt like to be forgotten. I did not tell them my story. I did not need to, because in many ways we shared the same understanding, the same quiet resilience that comes from having faced loss and chosen to keep going. I donated a portion of my wealth, not as an act of charity, but as an act of purpose. I wanted my resources to create something positive, something lasting, something that would benefit those who truly needed it. And with each passing day, I felt a sense of fulfillment growing inside me, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I had finally found a way to live that felt true to who I had become. One evening, as I returned home after a long walk, I found a letter waiting for me, placed neatly at my door. I picked it up slowly, recognizing the handwriting. Immediately my heart paused for a moment, not out of fear, but out of something more complex, something that carried both familiarity and distance. I went inside and sat down before opening it, taking a deep breath as if preparing myself for whatever words awaited me inside. The letter was simple, written in a way that felt raw and unguarded. "Abba, I am sorry," it began, the words clear yet heavy with emotion. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to see me again. I made a mistake that I cannot undo. I allowed greed and impatience to blind me, and in doing so I lost something far greater than money. I lost you." I read those lines slowly, letting each word settle in my mind. There was no anger in me as I read it, no desire to reject her apology, no urge to respond immediately. There was only a quiet sense of understanding, because I knew that she had finally realized the truth in a way that no lecture, no argument, no punishment could have taught her. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table beside me, leaning back in my chair as I looked out the window. At the fading light of the evening, the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold, the kind of view that reminds you of how beautiful simple moments can be, and as I sat there I felt tears fill my eyes, not the kind that come from pain, but the kind that come from release, from closure, from the acceptance of what is and what will never be again. I did not know if I would ever see her again. I did not know if our relationship could ever be repaired, but I did know one thing: I had done what I needed to do. I had faced betrayal without losing myself. I had chosen strength without becoming bitter. I had allowed myself to feel pain without letting it define me, and in doing so I had found something far more valuable than revenge: peace, the kind of peace that does not depend on others, the kind that comes from within, the kind that stays with you even when everything else changes. And as the sun disappeared completely and the night settled quietly around me, I whispered softly to myself, the old man did not lose everything that day. He found something he had forgotten. He found himself, and in that moment I realized that the sweetest revenge is not making others suffer. It is living fully, freely, and happily without needing anything from those who once tried to take everything from you.